Warm greetings. Welcome to Heart Stories. May you find yourself and healing through the stories we share. Now, let the journey begin.
He stepped off the midnight bus with nothing but sand in his boots and silence in his chest. Evan hadn't spoken to anyone since the base commander handed him discharge papers, 2 years and 8 days after the day his father stopped calling him son. The desert heat still clung to the fabric of his sleeves, but the cold of home seeped in through his spine the second he crossed county lines. He hadn't come back to be welcomed. He didn't even plan to knock on the door. All he wanted was to see it again, the house where his life split in two. The last place he stood before being told he was no longer part of the family. A small, aging home with chipped brick steps and windows that still glowed yellow behind sheer curtains. He imagined them all asleep, just as they were the night he left. Except this time, he wasn't coming to say goodbye. He was just passing through, a ghost checking the place of his own burial. But someone else was already haunting it. On the porch, under a dim porch light that buzzed like it might go out any second, sat a child. Not asleep, not waiting, just there, curled up on the top step, knees pulled in tight, wearing a glittery blue dress with tulle spilling over scraped legs, a cheap tiara slightly askew, and mascara that had run rivers down soft, rounded cheeks. A teddy bear dangled limply from one arm. The child didn't look up, just shook, shoulders trembling, like the cold wasn't from outside but from somewhere deeper. And in that moment, Evan's heart did something it hadn't done in a long time. It broke again, but not for himself. He took a cautious step forward, gravel crunching beneath his boot. The boy finally looked up. Their eyes met brown to brown, years apart but carved from the same tree of rejection. The child blinked, then whispered, barely a sound. "Dad said I was just like you. That's why I have to go." Evan froze, his throat clamped shut. For a moment, the night felt too still, too scripted. History didn't just repeat, it recycled, reused, and repackaged its cruelty for a younger version of himself. He didn't need to ask the child's name, he already knew. Nico, the half-brother he'd never met in person, only seen once in a photograph mailed during Evan's first week of deployment. A baby in a high chair, grinning with jam on his chin. Frank's second chance at a normal son. But even second chances weren't enough when you were born different. Evan dropped to one knee. He wanted to say something, anything, but there are no words when a house breaks you, builds itself back up, and then breaks someone smaller the exact same way. He remembered his own night on those steps. No suitcase, just a trash bag of clothes and a silence that rang louder than yelling. And now here Nico was too young to know what survival meant, but already carrying the bruises of nonconformity. Inside the house, lights flickered behind the curtains. A shadow passed, but no one came out. No one called for Nico. No one cared that a child was on the porch, in a dress, mascara running like melted dreams. Evan stood and offered a hand. Nico took it without a word. Sometimes, recognition doesn't need language. It needs pain shaped in a way only a mirror can reflect. As they walked away from the house, Evan didn't look back. Not because he was strong, but because he didn't want to see if the door opened. He already knew it wouldn't. And as the porch light finally blinked out, it felt like the universe confirming they weren't just unwanted. They were never even considered. But maybe, just maybe, that's where healing begins. Not in returning, but in witnessing someone else be hurt the same way and choosing not to let it happen twice. Because Evan wasn't supposed to be a savior. He just refused to be the silence that allowed it again. If you believe every child deserves to feel safe being exactly who they are, subscribe now to Heart Story, where real stories light the way forward. Let's continue with part 2 when you're ready. The apartment smelled like old carpet, burnt toast, and quiet desperation. Evan hadn't changed much since the last time he stood in this room. Same mattress on the floor, same lamp missing its shade, same ceiling crack that traced the shape of a crooked wishbone. But now there was something new, a second pair of shoes, tiny ones, soaked and glittered. Nico's. He watched as the child wandered cautiously, trailing fingers along scuffed furniture, eyes catching on every faded photograph and dented surface like they were trying to memorize survival. Evan didn't say much. He couldn't. The weight of 2 years swallowed most of his words. The silence was not emptiness. It was memory. This was the same space where he once laid motionless on that very mattress, too tired to cry, too numb to move. The same place where, after being expelled for behavioral disruptions, denied leases for being a risk, and losing custody of his own dog because the adoption agency didn't approve of unstable environments, he almost stopped trying. One more eviction notice, one more closed door, and he might have disappeared. And now, Nico stood here, small and cold, cradling a teddy bear like it could undo the cruelty of a father who'd taught his family to mock their own blood. "Dad made me stand still in the living room," Nico said suddenly, voice thin like the last thread of a fraying cloth. "He told everyone to say what was wrong with me, even Grandma. She said boys like me need therapy or Jesus." Evan didn't flinch. He'd heard it all before in different tones from different mouths. Sometimes the words wore concern, sometimes disgust, but they always pointed in the same direction, away from love. Later that night, when Nico fell asleep curled up in Evan's old hoodie, Evan scrolled through his phone, fingers shaking. He searched for the emails he had written, 47 messages over 2 years. Holiday greetings, updates from the base, letters filled with photos, hopes, and apologies, not a single reply. He told himself maybe they were busy, maybe it was the signal overseas, maybe they missed him, but didn't know how to say it. But one swipe too far revealed the truth. Every message bounced back, every social media account blocked. His existence wasn't forgotten. It was erased. A slow heat crawled up his spine. Evan walked to the bathroom, stared into the cracked mirror, and punched it hard. The glass shattered, like something inside had finally reached the surface. Blood pooled from his knuckles. The pain was sharp, but not unfamiliar. He barely noticed until he heard small footsteps behind him. Nico gasped, ran, came back with the hem of his Elsa dress, torn hastily from the skirt, and wrapped it around Evan's bleeding hand. The fabric stained fast. Blue silk, now red. "You're not supposed to bleed," Nico whispered. "You're the strong one." Evan looked at him then. Not like a brother, not like a protector, but like someone seeing a reflection he never asked for, and yet couldn't walk away from. In that moment, Nico wasn't a child who needed saving. He was the one who stitched Evan back together softly, silently, like the world had given him one chance to rewrite the ending of someone else's story. The apartment was still dark, the air still stale, but now it held 2 survivors, one learning to remember, the other learning not to disappear. And somehow, in a place where Evan once considered leaving the world behind, a child had reminded him that healing isn't always a grand act. Sometimes it's small. Sometimes it comes dressed in glitter and ribbon with trembling hands that still believe broken people are worth fixing. Because the truth is, the people who hurt you may set the rules, but they don't get to define your story. And sometimes, the only way to undo damage is to become the kind of presence someone else needs, before the silence swallows them too. By sunrise, Evan had already brewed coffee, microwaved a frozen waffle, and Googled the local elementary schools. Nico stirred beneath the hoodie like a moth in a cocoon, one eye opening at the scent of maple syrup. For a moment, Evan let himself believe they could make this work. 2 misfits building a routine. But the world outside didn't share his hope. The woman at the school district's front desk smiled until Evan mentioned Nico's name. Then her expression stiffened, and she reached for a different folder, one with flagged reports. "Behavioral concerns," she said vaguely. "Dress code violations, emotional disruptions." Evan asked to speak with the principal. They were led into a bland office with motivational posters peeling off the walls. The principal, a man in his 50s with a striped tie and the voice of someone used to giving apologies without meaning them, glanced at Nico like he was trouble in soft skin. "This school," he said flatly, "maintains a standard of focus and discipline. We don't encourage distractions. Kids have enough pressure without other students drawing attention." Evan didn't raise his voice. He just pressed record on his phone and laid it face up on the desk. "I served this country for 2 years, he said quietly, "and my little brother has served 8 years of silence, shame, and fear. Who's more of a soldier?" The principal blinked, but didn't answer. They walked out, hand in hand. Evan uploaded the audio with a single caption. He wore a uniform, Nico wore a dress, both were punished. Then he added a short video, Nico, twirling gently in the Elsa dress, smiling like nothing could touch him. And then came the flood: comments, shares, duets, hashtags #ProtectNico, #LetThemBeKids, #TinySoldier. Overnight, the video went viral. Journalists reached out. LGBTQ plus child advocacy groups sent emails. A nonprofit offered legal support. A local news anchor asked to do a story. Evan wasn't looking for fame. He was looking for proof that the world hadn't gone blind. One interview stood out. In front of the camera, Evan sat on the edge of a couch with Nico beside him, swinging his legs, a tiny rainbow pin on his collar. "They called me a disgrace," Evan said, "but I don't care if Nico never wears a uniform. I just want him to grow up not hiding who he is, just to be loved." It aired on the evening news. Their father saw it. The next day, Frank showed up at Evan's apartment, pounded the door, screamed from the hallway, demanding Nico back. Lisa, the stepmother, had already filed a complaint accusing Evan of kidnapping. Her voice trembled with legal threat, but not maternal concern. That night, Evan packed everything in silence. No time for goodbyes, no time for sleep, just 2 backpacks, 1 torn teddy bear, and a child in a hoodie too big for his shoulders. They slipped out the back stairs while police lights flashed at the front. Outside, it was raining. They ran. The street swallowed their footprints. The city didn't notice, but somewhere between the alley and the bus station, Evan looked down and saw Nico holding his hand tighter than ever, not out of fear, but faith. He wasn't just running from a broken home. He was running toward a better one, even if it hadn't been built yet. Because sometimes, safety isn't found in structures, laws, or systems. Sometimes, it starts in the arms that say, "I see you. I'll never be the reason you disappear." And sometimes, love is resistance, the kind that fights quietly, until the world can no longer ignore the child standing in a dress, asking for nothing more than to be allowed to grow. They didn't need an address to keep moving, just enough bus fare and a belief that somewhere, someone had left the light on. It came in the form of a beige building tucked behind a quiet church, no signs, no fanfare. Just a door with a buzzer and a plaque that read, "Safe House Program, LGBTQ plus Youth Emergency Shelter." Evan hesitated before pressing it. Nico didn't. He reached up and tapped the button with the kind of urgency only a child who has learned to run can carry. They were let in by a social worker named Marla, who offered juice and warm towels and a kindness that wasn't performative. She didn't ask why they were there. She just pointed them toward a shared room with bunk beds and a window that let in real morning light. Evan didn't realize how long it had been since they'd slept somewhere that didn't hum with fear. Nico took the top bunk, Evan took the floor. That week, everything began again. Nico enrolled in a nearby school, partnered with the shelter. No uniforms, no gender rules, just kids with bruised beginnings learning to trust mornings again. His first day, he came home clutching a crayon-streaked paper with his name in bubble letters. Under it, a note group leader mural committee. He'd been chosen. Evan stared at the words for a long time. Later, Nico explained the theme for the mural Homes Without Shadows. He said he wanted to draw a house made of glass, where people could see you and still choose to stay. Meanwhile, Evan found work at a nearby community center. It wasn't glamorous, just folding chairs, mopping floors, helping organize workshops, but it gave him purpose. Someone noticed his way with the younger teens, and soon he was asked to lead a support group. They called it LGBT Survival for Kids. His first topic, what if the bully is your dad? He didn't have notes, just a memory that still hurt and a room full of eyes waiting for someone to say the unsayable. He spoke carefully, told them that silence wasn't safety, that being rejected didn't make them wrong, that surviving didn't always look heroic, it often looked like showing up, again and again, even when no one clapped. He didn't mention Nico by name, but the kids noticed the fabric around his wrist, the faded blue scrap that once belonged to a princess dress. It said enough. One afternoon, Evan returned to the shelter to find Nico sitting quietly at the table, clutching a white envelope. "I invited him," Nico said, voice barely above a whisper. "Him?" Evan asked, though he already knew. "Dad." Nico nodded. "To my art show. I left it anonymous. Just in case." Evan felt something rise in his chest, anger, panic, disbelief. But Nico wasn't looking for permission. "I don't need him to love me," he said simply. "I just want him to know I didn't disappear." Evan couldn't speak, couldn't tell him not to hope, because that was what had kept him alive once too, the belief that if someone just saw who he'd become, they might regret not staying. The night of the mural unveiling, the room was full of people, teachers, counselors, other parents. A banner overhead read, "Every child deserves the sun." Nico's section of the mural stood out, a glass house, sunlight pouring in, two figures inside one tall, one small holding hands, no doors, just wide open windows. Frank didn't show up, but Nico didn't flinch. He stood by his painting, explaining each line to strangers with the clarity of someone who had already stopped waiting for the wrong kind of apology. Evan watched from the back, hands still wrapped in blue silk, knowing that no one had given them this family. They'd built it scrap by scrap, breath by breath from all the pieces someone else threw away, and that was the thing about healing. It didn't always come from being accepted back. Sometimes, it grew when you realized that love doesn't have to come from blood to be real. Sometimes, the family you lose teaches you how to become the one you needed all along. The mural stayed up for 6 weeks, long enough for dust to gather near the floor tiles and for new kids to arrive at the shelter, dragging duffel bags filled with the same stories in different voices. Evan and Nico settled into something close to rhythm. Mornings were school drop-offs and grocery lists scribbled on napkins. Evenings were quieter art supplies scattered across the table, documentaries playing in the background, and the occasional knock on the door that still made them both flinch. But one Saturday afternoon, Evan came home to find Nico on the floor, surrounded by shoeboxes. "What are you doing?" he asked. Nico didn't look up, just held up a sealed envelope with his name scrawled on the back. Then another and another, all addressed to Frank's house, all stamped, folded, torn. Evan's throat closed. These were the letters. The ones he had written from the desert. Letters he thought were lost unanswered, discarded, forgotten. Nico had kept them. Every single one. "I used to take out the trash," Nico whispered, "because it meant I could see if anything had your name on it." Evan knelt beside him, hands trembling. They'd throw them away without opening. Sometimes they'd tear them in half first. "But I didn't want you to disappear." One letter had dirt on the corner. Another still had a melted gum wrapper stuck to the back. But inside, Evan recognized his own words, raw, desperate, hopeful, lines written from a barracks cot under desert moonlight, messages to a family that never wrote back. But someone had been reading. "I needed to know someone like me once lived here," Nico said, "and survived." Evan pressed the letters to his chest, not like a soldier, not like a protector, just like a brother who finally understood the weight of being someone else's only evidence that life after rejection was possible. The silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It was sacred. That night, Nico added one more drawing to the mural journal he kept beside his bed, a small boy holding scraps of paper in the wind. His smile wasn't wide, but it was real. And Evan knew then sometimes, your words don't save you. They save someone who hasn't even found their voice yet. The next morning, Evan used one of those letters to open his next workshop. He held it up creased, soft at the corners, smeared with a faint fingerprint, and said, "This never came back to me." But it found someone who needed it. He didn't name Nico. He didn't have to. Because every child in that room had a letter of their own, maybe not on paper, maybe not with stamps, but written in the way they dressed, spoke, stayed quiet, or dared to be visible. All of them had tried, in some way, to reach out, and many of them had been thrown away, too. But Evan's voice didn't shake when he added, "You are not meant to disappear." He ended the session by writing a letter to himself, folded it, left it on the windowsill, not because he needed to read it, but because someone else someday might, and if they did, maybe they'd understand not every family will keep you, but someone out there is reading, and they're holding on. Have you ever found something someone threw away only to realize it was exactly what you needed to hear? Tell us in the comments. Your voice might be the letter someone else is waiting for. Subscribe to Heart Story for more true stories that remind us the ones who survive become the light for those still searching.